So did you know that the average American eats over 120 apples every single year? There are over 10,000 different varieties of apples, 5 of which you got to sample this morning, compliments of Stacy. And we know that eating apples is associated with a lot of benefits. You're probably familiar with the phrase, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Another fun fact, did you know that this was first recorded in the 1860s? The proverb originated in Wales, and the original wording of the saying was, eat an apple on going to bed and you'll keep the doctor from earning his bread. All right, so there are so many amazing culinary and beverage applications for apples, so it's not surprising that they are such a beloved food. Our Fargo-Moorhead community produces some amazing apples, as well as really delicious, unique products featuring those apples. So today we're excited to learn and discuss more about these from tree to glass. So let's get started. Would you please join me in welcoming Sam DeMarais from the Fargo Park District, Stacy Heising from Cottonwood Cider House, and Ethan Hennings from Wild Terra Cider.
All right, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I'm going to get started today by just talking about a few things that the Fargo Park District has to offer and what Fargo has to offer that I'm personally aware of. There might be more out there that I'm not aware of, and there probably is, but these are the things that the parks are involved with. So one I want to mention, which is new, is up at Yunker Farm. There's a Northern Plains Botanic Garden Society, and they're calling it their edible forest. So this is about a 1 acre plot, produce fruits and nuts, and sponsor workshops and horticulture practices there. Just kind of be a place for beauty and rest. There's going to be 20 different fruit trees, 27 shrubs, 8 vines, 12 brambles, 75 berry plants, and 3 pollinator gardens. So quite a variety in a small 1 acre plot, but it should be a really cool place. Right now the fence is up, the kind of turf and trails are in, and I believe their goal is by the summer of 2020 to be open to the public and have most of those plants installed. So remember to go check that out next year. It should be a new addition to Fargo. That should be really cool. The one that I'm most involved with and have been just for the last 4 years or so since the Park District has really taken control of the maintenance of is Orchard Glen Park. So a lot of you have probably heard of Orchard Glen Park or been there. Everybody in here in this room at least heard of it or been out there? Okay. Absolutely beautiful in the springtime. There's about 360 apple or crab apple trees out there, so you can imagine when they're all blooming, really cool sight to see. I know the photographers love it. So this is about 15 acres of an orchard, and then this is Orchard Glen Park, so it is one of our 3 nature parks in Fargo that we have down in this area. So there are other things there like hiking trails and a cross-country ski trail as well. But talking about the orchard in general, just 4 years ago we went out, kind of assumed, control and maintenance of this property, and just took a look at it for the first time. There was lots of, declining trees, dead trees falling over. I don't think the orchard had been maintained or really touched in that way, probably since like the '97 flood. So currently out there, like I said, there are about 160 crabapple trees, 200 apple trees. And then in 2018, we did a big project for Arbor Day with about 250 students, got a grant from North Dakota Forest Service, and we planted 65 different fruit trees. So most of those were apple, but I think there was at least 5 or more of plum, pear, and cherry. So we also did plant some mulberry trees out there later last year. So kind of our goal is to not just have apples out there, but kind of diversify it and have lots of different fruit trees and maybe some nut trees as well. So Orchard Glen is open to the public. It's a it's a Fargo Park District park. It's open just like any of our other guidelines. There are just a few special ones since it is an orchard. You know, we want people to harvest the fruit out there, of course, and utilize it. We want people that are utilizing the fruit that are for non-for-profit companies or organizations or just generally people's use. So those are kind of the guidelines we released and have a sign out there now. But so like I mentioned, kind of the maintaining the orchard, you know, what are we going to do out there? I'm sure a lot of people are kind of wondering now that this is in a entity's hands with a lot of resources, you know, what's going to happen with the orchard. So really we're just kind of in a 5-year restoration phase. I kind of worked with some other local professionals from NDSU and talked about, you know, what should we do now that we have this orchard? How should we restore it? So first couple of years, just removing dead trees really and getting some of those out of there. We did have that opportunity to replant the 65 new trees like I talked about, and that was pretty much a one-to-one replacement of the trees that we removed. We've been, you know, just selecting some trees for thinning as well. So some trees weren't necessarily dead, but we're taking them out to allow some more space for new trees, and also just better airflow and better conditions out there for the apple trees. You know, and then in the next few years, we're going to be doing, this is year 4 of that kind of 5-year restoration plan. And then the next few years, we're going to be just trying to do some more pruning. As you can imagine, apple trees not touched for, you know, 13, 15 years or more. There's a lot of suckers, a lot of growth, and so we're trying to prune them and do as much as we can out there. And really about a 1 or 2 week span a year is all the time that we have to work on them. So with that, you know, I guess the biggest thing with another issue out there is just maintaining the understory. You know, it's a nature park, so we want to leave it kind of natural, but it's difficult to have an orchard and have long grass and invasive weeds and things like that. So that's kind of the debate we're going on now, and thinking we'll probably mow the orchard more often, and especially when it comes time to flower season and picking season. So I was going to talk a little bit about pruning trees, but it looks like I'm running short on time, and I want to keep this brief, but please ask questions about pruning apple trees in the Q&A session. So Stacy, I think you're up next. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out. My name is Stacy Nelson-Heising. I am the 4th generation, the 4th Nelson to be farming my family's land. Just a little history. Our farm was started in the early 1900s by my great-grandparents, Nels and Nellie Nelson. My dad, Chuck Nelson, and along with his father, Norman Nelson, they continued the farm legacy. And in the early, mid-80s, my dad, along with his brother Larry and my grandfather Norman, became one of the first certified organic grain farms in North Dakota. Here they are at the MPSAS conference back in the early 90s. Now, then there came me. So I kind of threw a wrench in the whole plan there. After my dad retired in 2006, I needed to figure out a way to continue farming. So our idea was to start an orchard. Our orchard is in an area that's an 11-acre fenced-in orchard. We do have an irrigation system, and we care for our orchard by using organic and biodynamic farming methods. In 2012, when we first started planting, we put in 100 trees, and then in 2013, we got a little crazy and put in 900 more. So we've been planting every year since then. And so now, 2019, we have over 2,000 semi-dwarf apple trees, and everything is certified organic, so we're pretty happy about that. A little bit about the planting. We are planted in an alfalfa field. We work with a crew of anywhere between 2 people for digging and either 2 or 4 people for planting. Our trees generally come to us, they're about 3 all the way up to 8 feet tall. Some of the things we do throughout the year to care for our orchard, in the fall we use a tree paint to protect the bark from sun scald. We use plant skid, which is an animal blood spray to protect the barks from rodents. I do prune in the winter, so you'll see me out there in February, March. And then in the spring, we spray the trees with a fish fertilizer. In our orchard, you're going to see a real big, diverse plant life and animal life out there. We encourage the birds and the bees and even the weeds. We do have over 40 varieties in the orchard at the moment. And as you can see, apples come in all different shapes and sizes and flavors. Here's just a list of what we have out there. You can see more of it by going to our website. And there's a description of everything and where they were developed and what year they were developed at. Okay, so when we started planting the orchard, the question I would get all of the time is, what are you going to do with all those apples? So we put our heads together and figured things out. We hit the road and we started meeting people. We did a feasibility study on doing a cidery. They gave us the thumbs up and said, this is a good business plan, go for it. So we started going to the East Coast, the West Coast, everywhere in between. We met people, we started planning our facility. We joined the United States Association of Cider Makers. And then in 2017, the construction began. And then by February of 2018, we were already selling cider in the state of North Dakota. Our tasting room out in the cidery is located right in the middle of everything. So it's not unusual if you come out there during the season to be right in the midst of all of the cider making and the apple pressing. So don't wear nice clothes, you will get dirty. Our goal every year is not to recreate last year's cider. We believe that the cider, since we're working with a product from nature, it's going to be different, and we're okay with that. Here's some pictures of Operation Day on pressing. Our first keg pickup. Lots of cleaning. There's lots of cleaning when you're making cider. Here are a few of the ciders we make. To this date, we've come up with about 14 different cider varieties. You can find us on tap throughout the state. We are proud to be a vendor at the Red River Market and also out at the Cidery and Air. So, thank you very much.
Well, I thought I was prepared for this. Kudos to Sam and Stacy for doing their talk without notes, but I need notes. I don't know if that's cheating or not, but. So apples can be used for creating a myriad of different food products. I like to use them for making cider as well. That is what we do at Wild Terra. Believe it or not, some people are unsure of what cider is. A lot of people come into the bar and they ask questions, and it seems like there's a lot of confusion out there. Up until actually preparing for this First Friday talk, I hadn't done this yet, so I Googled what is cider. And to prove my point, Google is confused too. Wikipedia has it right, if you do it and you look yourself. Dictionary.com has it wrong. So plain and simple, cider is fermented apple juice. And it's clearly known as this everywhere else in the world. This is the only country that has the confusion. If you go anywhere else to a restaurant or bar and you order a cider, it's going to come with alcohol in it. It is fermented. And the reason for that, the long after effects of prohibition in this country has since created that confusion and made it difficult for the producers and the consumers alike to understand what cider is or what to call it. So while a lot of people it might take a long time for everybody to agree on the nomenclature, I just like to focus on showing people what the beverage can taste like. So I want people to know that cider is not a single note one-hit wonder, you've had one, you've had them all kind of beverage. There's so much diversity in the beverage category. If you think about starting with the base of what it is, apples, and think about the 7,000 plus varieties that are around the world, and then begin to think about terroir, the soil, the climate, the growing conditions that we grow our fruit in, how that can change from spot to spot around the world, just the same variety. You begin to imagine the endless possibilities of cider that can be made. Ciders can be made of single varietals, blends, excuse me, dry to sweet, still like wine, or have bubbly carbonation. Then you have yeast selection, wine yeast, beer yeast, wild fermentations, which is a spontaneous fermentation from the local native yeast. Cider making practices, temperature differences in fermentation, all of these things contribute to making each cider vastly different and unique. And on top of all of that, you have the modern cider making approach of adding or infusing other ingredients into the cider, such as other fruits, berries, spices, herbs, hops, different sugars such as honey, or barrel aging or wood aging your cider. You can see why I firmly believe that there's a cider out there for everybody. When people come into our tap room and they say, I don't like cider, I ask them, what is it about the cider that you've had that you don't like? Or I ask them, what do you typically like to drink? And then that helps me quickly narrow down what I can sample them, and often they're pleasantly surprised by what I've given them. What we have in our tap room is just a drop in the bucket of what cider can be internationally. It's a lot of hard work to make cider, whether you're an orchardist or you're gathering other local apples and pressing them. For us and our cider, it starts with the community's involvement. Last year we collected and picked about 20,000 pounds of donated apples. Our mission is to grow that network of people in our community and out in the rest of the state of people with apple trees. We also want to help connect people with trees to those that have the knowledge that can then help them to better care for their trees and grow a better apple in North Dakota. And if they have an abundance of apples, then we'll take them and we'll put them to use. The squirrels don't need all the apples in their yard. Also, anyone can make cider at home to some degree if you're interested in learning how to do that. If you have access, if you have a tree yourself, or you know somebody or a neighbor that has one, it seems like most people do, which is interesting. Once we started our project and seeing how many people did then make the connection, know different people that had apple trees. If you don't, there's no excuse in Fargo because, as we learned, we have an orchard in town. So you can actually go down there and pick them when they're ready on harvest season. So everybody has access to apples in this area, and anybody can make cider at home. So I'm willing to help answer any questions anybody might have if you want to get started on it. The more people out there that make cider at home, I feel the more excited we all get about it. Knowledge gets shared, the art and the science of it gets pushed forward, and yeah, everybody can then be a little bit more excited about the beverage. We have classes and demonstrations in our tap room throughout the year that focus on cider history and cider making education. So please don't hesitate to hit me up if you have any questions. Thank you.
All right. That was awesome. Thank you guys all so much for sharing that wonderful information. I know I have a million questions now to ask, but we're going to let the audience start. So this is the portion of our presentation where you get to ask your questions of these knowledgeable, interesting folks. So anything that you want to know related to apples from tree to glass, now is your chance. Just raise your hand. Jen.
For the two cideries, is it just strictly apples is the only fruit that you deal with, or do you ever deal with other berries added in for different flavors?
Oh, most definitely. That's where it gets fun, the experimenting, the adding of the different ingredients. So, yeah, we sure do.
Yeah, I like playing around with as much different local ingredients as possible, local hops, local honey, local berries. Yeah, I agree. That's where the fun comes in, is experimenting with different ingredients.
What's the craziest experimentation you guys have done?
I like wild ferments. I mentioned that earlier. It's very unique and unpredictable what you're going to get because you're not actually adding a commercial strain of yeast that's going to do a predictable task in the fermentation. So you're kind of like rolling the dice, and it's like it is what it is. I've been pretty happy with those, and they're really interesting.
I ordered 50 pounds of green apple Jolly Ranchers from Amazon and unwrapped every single one and put them in a vat of cider, and it has been sitting in our walk-in cooler now for about 2.5 years. The taste is kind of interesting, and maybe someday we'll bottle it and release it.
Other questions? I guess I have a question for Fargo Parks. So you have Orchard Glen now, and then there's the talk about the new urban botanical garden. Is there any other discussion about integrating more fruit trees into existing parks, or any new park developments that you have, incorporating more apples or other fruit trees too?
I wouldn't say there's necessarily ongoing discussion, but certainly thoughts that I've had since starting with the orchard. You know, some of the, I think, comments and concerns in the past would be, well, then there's apples all over the ground and we have to mow around them and pick them up and things like that. So, but there are certainly easy ways to around that and to make the maintenance, not an issue, and still have, fruit trees or apple trees in general parks. So, something that if we feel like we want to experiment with in one park and see how it goes, or if we get more interest from the public, that we're certainly willing to entertain.
And Orchard Glen does get pretty well harvested, right? The community is using that resource.
Yeah, I mean, if you go out there right now, you'll be hard pressed to find an apple. I went out there 2 weeks ago maybe and walked the whole thing slowly, and if you had an apple picker, you might be able to get a dozen. So unfortunately, I don't want to discourage people from going out there now, and there might be some hidden ones that you didn't find, but I think it's been harvested really well, and you don't even see many apples on the ground. So
who's picking them all? Someone in this audience. Jen, yeah?
Right along those lines too, obviously you have some that get spoiled and fall on the ground and stuff. How are those, do people clean those up too, or is that something you guys have to go later and clean up?
we don't go out and clean them up ourselves. I don't know if people take them and feed animals with them, or if just the deer and wildlife out there end up consuming them, but that's certainly something we're willing to entertain. I mean, apple diseases do overwinter in apples and things like that, so as a running a commercial orchard, that's probably a practice that they do to help control disease and mitigate that, but something we just don't have the time to do with the park district right now. So
Yeah, Stacy, what do you guys do with the apples that have fallen?
There really is very little waste. I am out there pretty regularly picking up apples off the ground. We don't want them to be left over in the orchard. If for nothing else, I personally feel like it's encouraging rodents to hang out, and I don't want to feed the rodents. So birds are one thing, not the rodents.
The squirrels have had enough apples, right?
We don't have squirrels. Where
My
we're
squirrels are
located.
fat, so they're eating all the
Yep.
apples. Yeah.
Can you use windfalls in your cider?
We do, yes. Yep, our process is any apple that we bring into the building, they're washed, and every single one of them is looked over. So, you can imagine last year we brought in close to 30,000 pounds of apples, and every single one of them was inspected. If there is something that we think shouldn't be in the cider, we'll cut it out with a knife. So, yeah, there's not a lot that goes to waste.
We try to, it's going to be probably a several-year process, but we want to do the harvest, the local community harvest each year and use local apples every year. So we encourage people, they're emailing me, "Here, are you taking apples again?" "Yep." You get apples every year, bring them to us. But yeah, there's several things that we hope to try to educate people on. Don't yank them off your tree. If they're green last year and they turned red, wait till they turn red. If they fall, pick them up. If they look good, we'll use it. But yeah, same thing. If it looks bad, we don't use it. We can't use it. And I try to, basically, rule of thumb is if you wouldn't eat it, we can't juice it.
So, Stacy and Ethan, you guys are both making ciders, but Stacy, you have an orchard where you know the varieties and you probably have a pretty specific understanding of the taste and what you're getting, whereas you're accepting apples from everywhere. So can you kind of talk a little bit about the difference in that, where you're getting all sorts of different apples and how you can control the taste of that versus you've got maybe a little bit more control in your cider making?
Yeah, for us, we have no control whatsoever, which is interesting and kind of part of the fun, because as she alluded to, each batch, each year is different, and I'm okay with that. I ask people when they bring in apples, do you know the variety? 9 out of 10 times they have no idea. I'd say 8 out of 10, and then 1 out of 10 they think they know, but it's not what it is. So I really don't know what I'm using. It's pretty much just mystery cider, and then we taste it and sample it, and there are all sorts of things to do to kind of measure it and try to, there's a blending process afterwards, and so there's ways to kind of like control it. But as far as what's coming into our doors, we can't yet until we have, eventually we want to have an orchard and have a little bit more predictability there. But for us, it's very much just a mystery cider.
Yeah, we also have that issue. People will contact us and say, hey, come pick our trees, and we ask what they are. 9 times out of 10, they don't know. I kind of have a sneaking suspicion what they are. But yeah, it's, for us at this point, since our orchard is young, we aren't able to have enough of one variety to do just a single varietal cider, with the exception of maybe Yellow Transparent or Harrelson and Honeycrisp. But yeah, we embrace that. And it really gives us an opportunity to play around, experiment, and yeah, it's not a bad problem.
Keeps it fun.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, Don.
For Orchard Glen, is there a treatment plan for the apple maggot, which causes the larvae that causes the brown streaking through, that kind of affects the fresh eating quality? So I was wondering if there's a treatment plan for that insect.
Well, as far as I'm aware, I think the best treatment is to pick up the fallen apples. We don't really have a plan to use any synthetic, pesticides or insecticides out there right now. The only thing we've talked about in our restoration plan is just spraying like an organic copper phosphate, spray it for apple scab or things like that. But we're really looking, I guess, for community involvement and volunteerism and things like that to help maintain the orchard and make it better. And so if there's groups out there that want to pick up fallen apples and things like that, I guess we're really looking for those opportunities to work with different groups and people in the community. And but as far as a specific plan for that, we don't have one right now.
Since we are caring for our orchard organically and biodynamically, making cider, we're not always getting these beautiful grocery shelf store ready, apples. So to come up with a different use and also to change the way that people view food. You don't need it to look like it came off a page of a magazine. So, you have a few blemishes, who cares?
And some of you might remember that our original name was Ugly Food of the North, so this is music to our ears. Yeah, back in the corner. Bill, I think it is.
Okay, so say I want to make some cider at home, and I get up a bunch of apple juice from the tree in my backyard, and I make a batch that way, and then I go, that was really good, and I go buy a jug of apple juice from the store, and I want to make cider from it. What are the differences in how you would approach those two cases?
So you can use store-bought juice. The differences there typically are the varieties that have gone into that juice. But I'll back up. The first thing that you want to make sure is read the label. If it's organic, if it's 100% juice, that's a great start. You have to make sure there's no other preservatives in there. A lot of times, juice that's shipped around the country gets these preservatives added to it so that it doesn't ferment naturally as it's going around the country. That's why they're there. But you can find juice that's been pasteurized. It will still ferment as long as it doesn't have those preservatives in there. But that doesn't mean that's necessarily what you want to use. A lot of the juice that gets shipped around is just, a couple of varieties. They're basically just the ones that you'd see over there on the produce aisle to eat, and that's fine. It will ferment and it'll make a cider. But if you have your own tree, and if you have the more varieties, the better. It's going to become more complex. You're going to have more aromatics. You're going to have more mouthfeel and different tasting notes. The more varieties that you can get into that juice to ferment, the better.
Yeah, I think basically you can do it with both juices. You will get a clearer product with juice that you're pressing yourself. The flavor is going to be fresher, but yeah, both will work.
Awesome. Mike?
So, the natural way to control some of the pests, wasps are our adversary, but I don't like to spray pesticides, so, you're just gonna lose some to the critters, but in a natural way, how do you, try to avoid some of that? I put up a little wasp trap, and that worked to a degree. Do you have any tricks that you can share?
For me personally, we are not seeing a big problem with bugs in our orchard. I don't know if it's because I am encouraging birds. I think that helps out quite a bit. Our biggest pests are those tent caterpillars. I don't know if you're familiar with those. And what they make like a web, and they'll completely defoliate a tree if you let them. And what I'm doing is I'm constantly out there looking for bugs, and I squish them with my fingers. It's very time consuming, especially when you have 2,000 trees, but I'm out there almost every day.
So are you looking for volunteers to come and join you for bug squishing?
Yep.
Sounds kind of therapeutic.
It can be. So, I totally recommend keeping your orchard as clean as possible. So be on the ground picking up those drops. Don't let apples to mummify on trees. That helps. And just really change your mindset.
So there's been a lot of questions about kind of keeping healthy apple trees. What are your guys' go-to resources or people that you are contacting when you have questions about things, whether it be websites or other apple tree professionals?
I find a lot of information from the internet. I do use Michael Phillips' book. He's an orchard guru. There's NDSU. They are a wealth of knowledge. One thing, though, that I want to caution people with about learning different techniques from other orchardists is just because it's working for them, it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So you really need to take that advice and adjust it to your situation.
Do you have a resource that you use, Sam?
Yeah, again, I work closely with NDSU Extension and Dr. Joe Zalesnik out there, and then also with Jim Walla, who's in the room here. Those have been my two kind of mentors, I guess, in trying to manage Orchard Glen, as I've done urban forestry and managing mostly shade trees and ornamental trees, but looking at it differently to manage an orchard, especially one that was in the condition Orchard Glen was in has been challenging and a new challenge. So definitely relying on those resources.
Just that I don't have to do probably quite as much, yet. Being that we don't have an orchard, but some people do come to us and ask us questions. I just direct them to NDSU, their extension. They do have people that are growing apple trees. We actually have at least one variety that I know of that's been developed here in North Dakota. Also, the U of M has a good website for different resources for apple trees.
Yeah, Deb.
So you got to that slide and got cut off on pruning. For those of us who do have apple trees, can you give a few tips to us for pruning?
Sure, you can come to our apple tree pruning workshop every spring. We've been doing that, I think we've done it for 2 years. So sometime in April or May, we'll just host a small workshop. There's been 15 to 30 people there, and we spend 3 or 4 hours going through the details. But kind of depends on if you're starting with a brand new tree or if you have a mature tree. But really, I guess the key things are trying to maintain good structure with your tree. So I had a slide up there, but basically, if you go to an orchard or an older orchard, the trees look sort of ugly. They don't look like your nice, perfect, round, ornamental tree in your lawn. They just have a few large scaffold branches that support apples really well, and they allow a lot of sunlight and air movement through. So the tree you should be able to see through it. I heard an experienced orchardist say that you should be able to throw your cat through the tree. And he worked and grown up on orchards for a long time, and that was his saying, that if you throw your cat in the tree, it shouldn't get stuck. But then also just, you can get apples every year through pruning and blossom picking or immature fruit picking. So there's lots of really good resources with NDSU and U of M that get into the details, or you can come to our workshop as well if you want to know more about the details, but I think those are the main things to talk about now.
Yeah, don't throw your cats in the apple trees. So Ethan, you were kind of talking about how cider is misunderstood in the United States. Where would you say globally that there is a really well-developed cider culture, where there's lots of varieties and people really understand what cider is and appreciate it?
Cider is all over the world being produced. It's exciting to see each year different cideries popping up in countries that don't have one, that didn't have one last year. Apples pretty much grow almost all over the world, so that has a lot to do with it. But it really most of the history started in Northern Europe. Apple kind of originated in Central Asia, and through trade, when they're trading all sorts of goods traveling from Asia along the northern part of Europe, that's where the apples are getting spread. And they started fermenting. A lot of these winemaking countries that have thousands of years of winemaking experience, they were fermenting apples as well, making cider. And so all the way down to this day, the UK, the northern part of France, and the northern part of Spain, all in that English Channel, that's heavily cultivated with apples and has long, rich history of cider making. And so those countries are primarily the ones that are making it and drinking it, but the U.S. is catching up.
And then Stacy, would you tell us about the different apples that folks got to try this morning and that are still out there for you to try after the program today?
Okay. Well, I brought a wealthy apple, which is an apple that was developed in Minnesota. It's a mid to later season apple. And then I brought a honey gold, which is the yellow apple out there. It's very, very tasty apple, once again developed in Minnesota. There's a frostbite, which is one of my favorite. It has a really nice honey undertone to the flavor of it. That's Minnesota also. And then the Amour de Berthier. Now, I'm not French, but that is a French developed apple. It's specifically for cider, and it is awful. So please try it. You might never get a chance to have one ever again. And then I brought the chestnut crab. So
thank you again for bringing those.
You're welcome.
All right, so we are out of time for our questions today, but we always wrap up every first Friday asking what can we do to support you guys. We've got our audience here that is passionate about apples and cider, and they want to help you guys out. So what can this community do to support your work?
Yeah, talking specifically about the orchard, I guess, just try to get involved if you're passionate about apples and Orchard Glen in particular. We're willing to discuss any projects or volunteer work or ideas that the community has on how to utilize the orchard, and we think it's a special place, and we want to make sure that we do it right by maintaining it properly and getting the community involved and really seeing the Orchard Glen in particular kind of blossom over the next few decades or so. But yeah, and then for parks in general, I guess just get out there in the community and use the park system, and we love to hear from you, either whether it's a complaint on something we can correct or a compliment that it's something we're doing really well. So I appreciate everybody's time here today.
drink cider. If you haven't tried it, try it and keep drinking it. And if you are a cider fan, drink more. Also, give a farmer you know a hug because we need it. Thanks, guys.
I second that. Drink cider. If you haven't been to Wild Terra yet, come in. We have not only the cider that we make on tap, we also have guest taps. So we actually have Cottonwood Cider on tap. Not all the time. We rotate through different products. So if you come in angrily demanding Cottonwood and we don't have it, I apologize, but we do rotate through different brands through our guest taps. So it's a good one-stop shop if you live in Fargo and you want to try both locally made ciders. But yeah, I also actually implore you to go out to the orchard when there is a good time to do that. I don't know if you schedule a time or if you have certain dates. I'll let Stacy answer that. But I do try to send people your way because I think it's important that people see an orchard, whether it's Orchard Glen or one that is a commercial orchard. It's really cool that we have these things in North Dakota now.
Thank you, Ethan. We are open to the public Saturdays and Sundays, and we're about closing up for the season here pretty soon. We do tours, so if you're interested in that, you can schedule a tour. We're about booked up for this year, so call quickly. You can get a hold of us either via our email or give me a call. So, yeah, come on out.
Awesome. Would you guys all please join me in thanking these wonderful speakers?